Have I done any good in the world today? Have I helped anyone in need? Have I cheered up the sad and made someone feel glad? If not, I have failed indeed. Has anyone's burdens been lighter today because I was willing to share? Have the sick and the weary been helped on their way? When they needed my help, was I there? Then wake up and do something more than dream of your mansions above. Doing good is a pleasure, a love beyond measure, a blessing of love. Each day, we have something to look forward to. There are days when we wonder if it's worthwhile to get out of bed. But we find it is after a while. You've never really lived until someone comes up and says thank you. And that's the key. Thank you, that you've done something for somebody. We who are here today have the opportunity of getting lots of thanks between now and the time that we call it quits. Lots of thanks, and why? Because there's going to be a lot of sickness. There's going to be a lot of unhappiness. And that's where we can fit in. That's where we'll do our job. Sure, everybody dreams of getting well and going to a doctor, but as we've been told, the time is now coming in this new Aquarian age when it won't be doctors, it'll be teachers. And that's what we're here for, to be teachers and to teach the way. We're on the skids. We're going downhill so fast as a world, physically and mentally, that sometimes we wonder if there's any chance. But there is. With a group like we have today and the people that you teach as you go out to help others, you'll take those by the hand that are on the skids going down and take them up the path. We're going to talk now on, I think, one of the most interesting subjects there is, the incurables. The incurables. Anybody would write on a subject as stupid as that. If it's incurable, why waste your time writing about it? This is a subject that has frightened many, many people because they have been told, we're sorry, but there's nothing can be done about it. Might keep them out of pain, might relax them a little bit, but there's nothing we can do about it. It is incurable. There are no incurable diseases on the face of this earth. There are some incurable patients, but there are no incurable diseases. I say this very, very blankly because this is the way it is. We've been through 40 years of it, and we know. The reason we have this little booklet, which is the smallest that's been written, The Incurables, is because people came to us and said, how comes that so-and-so was sent home to die and they followed this program of yours and they're still alive, or how comes this one didn't die? And the question came so often that we wrote the little booklet. We have found this. There are three types of people that we cannot help. There are three types. Number one is the hypochondriac who enjoys ill health. We can't do them any good at all. I never forget a case. I was up in the Northwest, and I had finished my series of lectures for the week, and the last night they wheeled a lady up to me in a wheelchair. And when they wheeled her up, she said, "Oh, Dr. Christopher, I've got to have a word with you." She said, "I want so much to be healed, and I feel you have the answer." And I looked at that woman, and like I have said a number of times, and I don't know why I say it, but it just comes. I said, ma'am, you don't want to be healed. You're happy. You're happy having people wait on you. And she went red in the face, and the lady that had pushed her down kind of chuckled and said, why did you say that? It's true. Well, I wished I hadn't been there, because the lady was very embarrassed, but it was true. The second type of patient that we cannot help, the one whose time has come. Everything moves in its time and season. There is an hour to be born, there's an hour to die, and I don't care if you have got 50 or 100 of the best doctors in the world gathered around that person, and the Lord says, come, they're going to go. You're not going to stop them. And we have seen this. We have seen cases that were skeletons covered with sores all over their body, well to death. And we have had them follow our program, and they have filled out, healed up, looked like a perfect specimen. Then they'd say, I guess this is it. I won't see you tomorrow. I'm going tonight. And did I? We have seen case after case. Their time has come. But the thought that came to me that made me so happy in several of these cases is the fact that instead of them going emaciated, horrible-looking object of skeleton covered with skin and things of this type, they went back whole. Whole. No more pain, no more cursing God because of pain and horrible anguish, but happy and felt that now's the time. We saw a cancer case once that never, I never forget it. This little lady, I threw the covers back off of her bed when I examined her, and you could look right down into the bowel. The case was awful. She was eaten up with cancer. I said, ma'am, I don't know how long you're going to live. I can't promise you anything. But I'll tell you, within a matter of 48 hours, you'll be out of this horrible pain that you're in, and you'll be living without pain. I can promise you that. And she said, all right. And her boy and girl said, fine. Let's get started on it. So we did. The lady was healed. And she sat, instead of sitting in bed being propped up, she was an ambulatory case at the beginning, she was up walking around. And she was enjoying herself. And one morning, the children, they were adult now, they were so happy to have their mother up and active once more, because it had been years that she'd been suffering. And she said, as they were sitting there having breakfast, well, she said, children, she said, I have never been so happy in my life. I have never been without pain for years. And she said, you know, just to be sitting here loving you kids and so happy, she said, it's wonderful. But she said, I'm going. I won't be here tomorrow. She said, in fact, it's not long. Goodbye, kids. Now, she had been months now feeling wonderful. And she just laid her head over on her hands, smiled at him as she laid her head down. She was gone. The boy was anointed too, and the anointment, in sealing it, the statement was made, if this boy is here and his job is not finished, bless him so that he will heal quickly and he can accomplish his job. But if his job is through and he has come here and there is no reason to hold him and he's wanted on the other side, Father, take him, but give us a sign that it is thy will. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And as we said, amen, the little guy looked up And he said, "Goodbye, Doc." He said, "Goodbye, Father." And he said, "Look, they're over there waiting for me." And he could see spirits waiting. "Goodbye." And quickly he was gone. Yes. But we had said, "Thy will be done." And it was the Lord's will, whichever way he went. But he died with a smile on his face. And the third type, there are those who won't follow a program. We can't help them. The one that does it faithfully, a good holistic therapist will say, "Now, I want you to do this procedure so many times a day, take these items so many times a day, do all of this 6 days a week, week after week after week." Of course, I was in my 20-odd years of practice before it got through my thick skull that the Lord meant what he said when he said, "6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, and the seventh thou shalt rest." Yeah. I had to wait until I found out that my patients that were just taking the program 6 days a week were getting faster results than those that were taking it 7 days a week. It worked just that way. And we found this out. But if a person will follow through as instructed and do it faithfully, week after week after week, 6 days a week, they're going to get results until their time has come, if that's the case, or otherwise they'll be healed. Of course, there's another type under the same classification. They're the ones who do it religiously. They do it on Christmas and Easter. They don't get the results that fast. It's a little slower. But outside of this, we've had some awful cases. I mean, cases that have been absolutely given up. There is nothing more can be done for them. But they're alive today. Why? Because they followed through faithfully. Now, when we come to the incurables, in this little booklet, it doesn't tell you what an incurable is by name. But I'll tell you what an incurable is. Anyone that people say can't be cured. It's that simple. Multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, polio, stroke, epilepsy. You go on and on. There's many of them. But we have found that there is a key why they haven't been helped. And those keys added together finally come to a point where they can be helped if they're not under these three categories that I mentioned. I got to tell another story I generally tell along with this one is when we forget to say, "Thy will be done." As I've said, whenever I interview a patient, whether it is just to speak to them or to do assistance in some way, I always have a silent prayer. My patient doesn't know that I'm praying, but a silent prayer that I'll have the Lord's help in whatever I do. When I was taken from the orphans' home in Salt Lake, the people who lived in the house next to us up on J Street in Salt Lake City, the Middaws, I'll never forget them, because I was a little guy. I went there when I was 14 months old, and I stayed there until we moved, and I was, better than 3 when we left. But I remember Mrs. Middaw. She was a tall, stately woman with long auburn hair, a beautiful soul, and she had 2 teenage children. Well, they had an afterthought, and a small little guy came, a little girl, and just a baby, a toddler. And those teenage kids just about spoiled this toddler silly. They just loved her to death. But one day, the little child got sick. And the mother got the doctors in, and the doctor said, it is an incurable, and there is absolutely nothing can be done for this child. And Mrs. Middaugh, a powerful woman, she said, "Don't tell me that. That child will live." And they said, "Oh, no. It's just got a day or two." Mrs. Middaugh said, "Get out." And she called in the elders. And she said, "I want you to minister to this baby." And they did. And they used the same expression, "Thy will be done." If the baby is here and the job is not done, let it stay in health. But if its job is done, then take it, if it be thy will. And she screamed, "The Lord's not going to take that baby. Nobody's going to take it. It's my baby and it'll live." The baby lived. The baby lived. We moved away. I saw the baby again when it was 40 years old. It was still one that would say, "Mama," and could toddle along, and the mother would still have to hold it by the hand. It wore diapers. It weighed 200 pounds. And Mrs. Middaugh was strapped with this baby because that child would not even look at anybody else. It wouldn't tolerate anybody else. It was Mrs. Middaugh that had to take care of it. And Mrs. Middaugh didn't have long auburn hair now. She had scraggly white hair down over her shoulders. Most of her teeth were gone and she looked like an old witch. Curvature of the spine. And she would go along crippled, and that baby, which was now about 250 pounds, would come along, "Mama." But she was tied to that baby. When that baby was 45 years old, the good Lord was kind enough to figure that Mrs. Middaugh had paid her way, and the baby died. Mrs. Middaugh just lived several days, and she was allowed to go. Thy will be done. If for no other reason than you're here for one thing, and that is to learn. We're not the big John R. That's what I was for many years. I could take care of anything. Sure. I'm a pretty little guy right now. And remember, thy will be done. Garlic. I give you a guarantee right now that if you'll use lots and lots of garlic, chew it and have it with you all the time and always use a lot of garlic, that you will never get flu or colds or pneumonia. Nobody will get close enough to you to give it to them. But really, it does purify the bloodstream. Your tasteless garlic, they have circumstantial evidence, exhibit A, B, C, and D, that proves that it does thus, thus, and thus. But it doesn't do thus, thus, and thus to me. I buy quart bottles of it. And it doesn't do the work that the raw garlic will do for me. It takes 1 pound of garlic bulbs to make up 8 ounces of garlic juice. And that 8 ounces is potent. I advise you to cut it. Let me give you how great garlic really is. After midnight, I got a call to go out on a double pneumonia case. And they gave me the instructions how to find the place. It was about 50-odd miles out. And it was 45 below zero. And I packed my bag and headed out. And when I got out there, I couldn't use the cold sheet treatment because the water was frozen up. But we found enough water in the tank back of the toilet that hadn't been frozen to give the boy an enema. We heated up enough to give him an enema and clean him out. He was about 18 months old, lying there with double pneumonia. Now, the physician had left the place and told them that he couldn't have gotten to the hospital. He'd have died before he got to the hospital. Furthermore, No hospital would come at that cold of night, that far anyhow. So he would come the next morning and sign the death certificate. And just be patient, and the boy would succumb. Parents don't take it that lightly. They started calling around, and no doctors, when they found out that the doctor had never signed off, would end of the case. Someone said, try Doc Christopher in Evanston, Wyoming. So they did, and we're not too bright. We said, how do we find the house? And we headed out there. Well, we gave the boy a massage, seeing we couldn't give him the cold sheet treatment. And we took garlic and made garlic paste. Now, the way you make garlic paste is to peel the garlic bulbs and grate them or grind them up so that it's fine, and then mix it. Now, in this case, we'll use petrolatum. We'll use Vaseline, which is a petroleum product, but it has a reason why we use it. We mix it half and half with the garlic and make a heavy paste. Now we take this paste, and in this case, we took the boy's feet and massaged them from the ankles down over the feet thoroughly with olive oil. Just as much olive oil as we could massage into the foot. Then we took the garlic paste, a ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch thick, put it onto gauze, and put it on the sole of the foot, right on the sole of the foot. Now, we never put it up on the sides of the foot, only on the sole. Remember, it's soul food. Now, I speak this genuinely because in the sole of the foot is every nerve in the human body ends off there. And from here, we can pull out congestion in the bronchi, in the lungs, in the whole area. And so we put the paste on each foot, put gauze around it, and put large cotton or wool, white socks on, hold it in place, and tuck the little guy in bed. Well, a few days later, we heard what had happened. The next morning, the doctor came back in to sign the death certificate. And the young boy was sitting up having a glass of grape juice for breakfast. Well, you know what? The demand was, what happened? Well, we got another doctor who took care of him and cleared him up. I want his name. I hadn't released my signature, and I'm going to sue. And this gentleman said, will you kindly get out of this house immediately? He said, I won't only refuse to give you his name, but it's none of your business. He said, your release would have been signing the death certificate. And he said, we're happy to have the boy alive. Well, they thanked me over the phone, which was quite a few miles, 50 miles off. But you know, the best thank you was over 25 years later when the boy came up to the podium and said, I'm the boy that you came out in the middle of the night, 50 miles, and saved my life by telling us what to use. And I enjoy living, so thank you. Well, you know, it kind of pays off. It paid off a lot more than the $5 I got from a house call. This little toad's feet were only about so big, you know, 18 months old. It didn't take a lot of garlic to do that. But not many days later, I was given another assignment, which gave me the difference. It was a big old Swede up in Salt Lake with size 14 feet that looked like hams. And we had the whole family sitting around grating garlic and crying about it. Oh, man, to cover those feet, it took a lot. He worked at the Utah oil refinery, but it saved his life. It saved his life because he had been given up. Also, this has happened so many, many times. Garlic can do so much good. Now, for instance, supposing you've got infection in your gums and you've got an infected area that's swelling up. Cut a button of garlic in two. Put it up in there and leave it all night. Oh, it'll blister, but it's not a painful blister, but it's a nasty looking one. But it won't leave any infection there. It'll pull the infection out. To start off with, I had been very successful over the years with my cases of epilepsy. Nearly 40 years ago, one of my first cases, or it wasn't my first case of epilepsy, but one of my early cases in my practice. This young fellow, a teenager, had to have someone with him 24 hours a day because he would go into spasms 20 odd times a day. Well, we were very successful. We used our antispasmodics. We cleaned the bowel. We did all the procedure. And he followed the diet program, and he was healed. Because of that, and because he was well known, his parents ran a big smorgasbord up in the Seattle area. And the word got around, and we had epileptics from all over the country. And they started to ship him in from out of the country, foreign countries. And I became well known as a doctor for epilepsy. And I got a little cocky. I'm not proud of it, but it was just a fact. And so they sent me a boy from Page, Arizona, 12 years old. One of the worst epileptics I'd ever seen. He'd been in an automobile accident, and he was sad. But when they brought him in to me, just another case. JR will take care of it. Big JR. Weeks went by, nothing happened. Nothing that I'd used for other patients would work on him. And finally, it wasn't Big JR anymore. Little old John R. was kind of upset. The boy and his parents had gone back to the motel. I went back to the office. The office was empty. I sat there back of my desk, bewildered. I had never been hit this hard before. I've been very fortunate. And I prayed. I was humbled down. I need some help. I knew there was only one place I could go. And I said, Lord, I want to help this 12-year-old boy. Nothing I have will touch him. I'm lost. I need thy help. Help me now. And I said, amen. The formula came. I wrote it down. Blue cohosh, black cohosh, blue vervain. Skullcap lobelia in 90 proof. I went out into my lab. I made it up. When he brought the boy back, I used it on him and it worked. We started to get results right now. It was amazing. I was so happy. And it was shown to me that it was a food for the motor nerve at the oblongata, at the base of the skull. I was shown that there are, which we are working with now, 3,500,000 herbs, which would take me several lifetimes going through one at a time. But the good Lord gave me 3 herbs in that formula that were specific for the medulla oblongata, for the motor nerve. 3, and the only 3 out of 3,500,000 that could be found. Blue cohosh, black cohosh, and blue vervain. and they worked for the medulla oblongata. Also, he had included in this formula another herb, skullcap. And the skullcap was an herb that is specific for the spinal cord. It'll clean up that spinal cord, and if there's any damage in it, heal it. From the atlas axis down to the end of the tailbone, which spinal cord carries the messages from the motor nerve, which controls the actions of the body, through the entire body, because that is your telegraph line that goes right down to the tail end of the bone, tailbone. And the lobelia, of course, is the catalyst, the accentuator. This put to work, it was wonderful. Well, we applied it through his ears using oil of garlic first for sterilization and as a rapid healer itself. And then we put in the B&B tincture. That's what we called it. The B&B tincture went in, the ears were plugged, and it was left in for 24 hours. And some fresh put in. Every morning, some fresh was put in, or every night, rather, and plugged. On the 7th day, the ears were flushed with warm apple cider vinegar and distilled water, half and half. We massaged back on the neck, up and down the cervicals, and the glands back of the ears. This was done regularly, along with the other things, but this was the key. Well, we saw such results, they sent the boy back to Page, Arizona, and his grandfather, who was staying with him, man in about his 80s, was stone deaf, and he had hearing aids, wires hanging down from both ears. And he watched his grandson, and he watched another of his grandchildren who had a horrible earache that they used the same formula on. It cleared it overnight. He thought, I wonder if that would do me any good. So he started using it in his ears. And in a few months, he pulled out both of his hearing aids, though you could scream at him with his hearing aids and he couldn't hear anything. He pulled them out, and he started to hear sounds, and finally he heard a whisper across the room. All right, he was healed. And since that time, through Healthview newsletter and through our patients relating the stories from one to another, thousands of hearing aids have been thrown away. Why? Because this very formula that the Lord gave me of blue cohosh, black cohosh, blue vervain, skullcap, and lobelia, this formula was one that was a miracle within itself. And it reversed that which medical science said could not be done. Lost hearing is lost. And it can't be reversed. Well, it can be reversed. And here we proved it. And we have proven it in hundreds and hundreds of cases since. Those nerves can be rebuilt. And here was the key. Well, this was intriguing because we had found that it worked on the entire motor system. A lady who had hiccups and had gone on for weeks, and she was afraid she was going to rupture some veins or arteries. She was doing it so hard. On an emergency going in on another case, she asked me between hiccuping if I'd stop and check her first. And out of my bag, I pulled a bottle of B&B tincture, and I put a few drops on her tongue. And she said, "Huh!" I said, "What happened?" She said, "I could feel it from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. Oh, all through my body. And the hiccups are gone." And they didn't return. We have seen these case after case after case. Well, This gave us a key. Why is multiple sclerosis? Why is muscular dystrophy? Why is polio? Why is a stroke? Why is there inactivity? We found why there was inactivity, the motor nerve. And we learned how to rebuild it. This is great. Then we learned the spinal cord, what to do going on down. We also found that where there was impingement and the stoppage was bad, that we would use the bone, flesh, and cartilage formula and bring it back into line again. We'll go into that more. But here was the case for epilepsy or any of the rest of the incurables. The motor nerve had to be worked on. People have come to me with insomnia so many times. I have had so many patients of all ages. They walk the floor all night, they can't sleep, afraid they're having to go to the asylum. I remember one old gent down in southern Utah. He was up around 80 years of age, and he had walked the floor every night, month in and month out. It wasn't only hard on him, but he was irritating the whole family. They'd be kept awake with him walking the floor. His son had heard one of my lectures and had passed the word on to the old gent. And the old fellow wouldn't do it for some time. So one night he was so beside himself, he said, "All right, I'll do it. Can I just take my shoes off and go in my stocking feet on the floor here?" And the son said, "Dad, if you're going, let's go." He took him by the hand and took him outside, took off his shoes and stockings, and he walked him around the lawn there for about 10 minutes. And the old gent hadn't slept for so many months, except snooze for 15, 20 minutes, and then wake back up again, walk the floor. The next morning, they had to awaken the old gentleman. He had slept all night long like a baby, and they had to get him to wake up. And we've had so many of these cases because when we get static electricity in our body, it loads in and the prana or intestinal or universal juice cannot go through. And so it gets stopped. Here we have got the entire principle of cleanliness once more. When we look into the iris of the eye at 12 o'clock, if you have a black line at 12 o'clock, the animation lifeline is in malfunction. Now, I am looking into your eyes. You see, I'd have to have a light and a glass and 35. I mean, I've got to have a light and a glass. All right. I tell you, iridology is one of the important things to learn. But when it is 12 o'clock dark, it means that someone has to wake you up in the morning. Someone has to get you moving, or you just stay home, won't even get to work, won't do anything. But here is one of the important things, is to get the static electricity out of the body and don't let it foul up. When we get too much static electricity in, we also help keep the mental institutions active. We put more people to work. This is a principle that has been getting wider and wider coverage. And I was so pleased within the last couple of weeks to get this report from Japan that they will not legally allow a Japanese child to go in rubber shoes, rubber-soled shoes. Be sure that if you're walking, you have a leather sole, you have moccasins, or you have some fibrous material. Do not use nylon Do not use any man-made synthetics, because you cannot get the electricity out of the body with this. All right, we're ready to start on a new series of herbs, and these are diuretic herbs. For the diuretic herbs for the plumbing system of the human body, kidneys to the bladder, etc., etc., etc. We mentioned once before that the body is so well built, these particular tubes going from the kidneys to the bladder to various parts of the body in the irrigation system, these are so delicate that they can be pinched apart with no trouble at all. They can be cut so easily. And yet we have hundreds of thousands of gallons that have to go through those with each individual during a lifespan. What are we putting into it? Well, if some of the people could see us pouring into the gasoline tank some of the things that we put into our human body, they'd call the boys in the little white jackets to come and pick us up. We put in some horrible things into the human body and expect those tubes to last 1,000 years. Well, they won't quite last that long. If we don't behave ourselves, 20 or less. Parsley is one of the great, great herbs, and it is so simple to grow. It is so easy to have around your own apartment, home, area, because it'll grow in flower pots, and you can have it the year around. Parsley leaves, this is the herb of herbs, but it's so simple, very few people realize how powerful it is. The stories come to us a number of times of people with infection in their kidney areas in the hospital. And one, not too long ago, a lady saw that her husband was there suffering with infection so bad, they were baffled. And she said, could I bring him in some parsley tea? Well, it won't hurt him, bring it in. Next day he was released, no more infection. He went home. This is something that we don't use because we don't know about it. This has been used for hundreds of years. And the English still have it in their gardens. A handful of parsley with a pint of boiling water over it has done miracles. I know of a lady, she told me this when she was in her 80s, that they had given her 90 days. That's as long as this kidney condition could last. Under the circumstance, she'd die, and nothing they had would take care of it. And a messenger came to her, divine messenger, and told her to take the parsley out in her backyard. A handful of it in a pint of distilled water, and drink a pint of it every day. She wouldn't die, as they said, in 3 months when she was in her early life, early 20s. I talked to her when she was 85, still alive and healed. All right, we've seen so many amazing things, but those kidneys and the bladder, if they are not taken care of, they can be a headache to us. They can be a big problem. I remember coming off of a dance job on the last trolley going home. This was when I was just a young kid. And I was sitting there on the trolley, and a young woman, I guess she was 18, 20 years old, was sitting there, a very dignified, well-dressed young lady, and it was bitterly cold. It was close to midnight, I remember it was Christmas Eve. And all of a sudden she started to cry, and she headed for the back door of the car. She was voiding her urine and couldn't help herself. When she got out there at sub-zero weather, I don't know how far she had to walk because she was ashamed to stay on that streetcar. But these are embarrassing things. But it doesn't start at 18 or 20, it starts very early. How many times does a 12-year-old boy or a 10-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy say, no, I won't go to the camp out with you. I don't want to go. Why don't you want to go? None of your business. Well, he's tough. He's putting on a front because he's a bedwetter. How many times does the girl say, no, I can't come to the slumber party? And you show me a girl that doesn't love slumber parties. I'll show you a girl that's pixelated. And she won't go to the slumber party because she wets the bed. Well, this can be overdone if we don't do something about it. It builds an inferiority complex and a bitterness within the soul and the heart of these individuals that cannot be taken out in many years. And so when the indications show, for heaven's sakes, use the kidney bladder formula. This has aided so many people with incontinence. This has aided so many come back to normal life again. This has just brought back to me a memory that I had forgotten about. It happened years ago. I was at a mining meeting, and there were a lot of people there, and while they were waiting for it to start, knowing that I was an iridologist, someone said, would you read my eyes? And would you read my eyes? And finally I was quite busy, and some teenager, I guess he was about 16 years old, and he was giving us a rough time, and he said, why do you listen to that old witch doctor? He's a nut. And he was going on and on. And finally, I took all I could take. I said, come here. And he walked over. I said, open your eyes. I took the light and glass, and I looked into his eyes. And he was a toughie. And he had 2 or 3 friends with him, and he was showing off in front of them. And I said, well, this is very interesting. Do you want me to tell it out in public, or should I whisper it to you? A witch doctor like you doesn't need to whisper anything. Just tell it out, because you know what you're doing anyhow. I said, maybe not. But I said, you're one of the biggest bedwetters I've seen as a teenager I've ever seen. And my tough little friend broke down and bawled right in front of everybody. And his 2 friends said, oh, it's about time someone told him. Yes. Well, I just about broke him up. And I said, all right, I'm sorry it had to be in public. But I said, drop over, I'll give you a formula that'll take care of it. And it took care of it, and he never forgot it. Well, the thing is, he was trying to cover up a weakness by being a bully. One of the saddest things is the fact that one of your best investments in the American market today is adult diapers. Yes, there's more money made in the adult diaper business than any other type of business for the amount invested. People that I never dreamed would be this way have come to me as patients and are wearing diapers. Adults, men and women. They cannot help themselves. We have a formula that has been very usefully used in old folks' homes. If you've been in as many old folks' homes as I have, because in my travelings, when I used to do diagnosing and prescribing from city to city, Of course, I had many calls to rest homes. Stink. Whew. You smell urine all over the place because they cannot control their voiding. They don't know they're going to do it, and all of a sudden they're embarrassed. Many adults have become recluses. They stay in their room because they're afraid to go out. They're afraid that they won't be able to make the distance between where they're sitting and the restroom in time. And the incontinence formula that we have has aided many of these coming back to normal life again, being able to control. This is a blessing. If there's anything that's sad, it's when a person has gone through a long, rough life and decide they're going to enjoy life for a while and then find they can't. The diuretic herbs are tremendous. The parsley, surely, it's one of the greats for killing infection and for rebuilding the plumbing system of the human body. But the parsley root, this is the one we use for dropsy. This is the one we use where they have a case of edema wherein nothing else will handle it. Had an interesting case. I had spoken one Tuesday evening in a lecture hall, and the following Tuesday, a woman came in kind of a rush and sat down. She said, could I say a word before you start your lecture? And I said, yes. And she got up. She said, last week we had a lecture on parsley root for dropsy. And she said, I just set it in my mind that that'd be nice to know, but I never thought that such a thing would happen, the next night, my brother-in-law in Chicago called me here in Utah and said, if you want to see your favorite twin sister, you'd better get over here because she has been suffering with dropsy and her body is bloated up like a poisoned pig. He said they cannot get the water out of her anymore, and she only has a few days to live. If you want to see her, you'd better fly over here. And she said, I flew out on Friday and got there, and I would never have recognized my sister. I wouldn't have known that she was a human being. She was so badly bloated. And she was unconscious. She was in a coma. I said to her husband, this makes me sick all over. He said, yes. You can see the children here that she's leaving. And they had a family of young children. What can you say? We're just waiting for her to die. That's all they say can happen to her. And this lady said, I just heard a lecture. Do you mind if I get the herbs that they talked about in the lecture and use them on her? And he said, use anything. Anything. He said, whether it'll do good or not, just try anything. She got a cab and went down into Chicago proper, went to the health stores, bought up all the parsley root that she could buy. She bought up glycerin, and she came back and she made up the parsley root tea. With the parsley root tea, she took about 1/4 of it. She'd made up nearly a gallon. She took 1/4 of it and added equal parts of glycerin to it, or added 1/4 in this particular case of glycerin. And she used this to massage the areas and put fomentations over the areas. And then she gave her sister a half a cup to drink. The sister didn't know what was going on. She was in this coma, but she'd prop her up and put the cup to her lips, and she would drink whatever was given her. And then she found out she needed more for the fomentations because the legs were so swollen and the arms, and she had to put fomentations over the entire of the parsley root. Now, unless you have seen these cases, and some of you have, they're horrible. My mother had edema, dropsy, and her legs and body had swollen so big that the pores, instead of being fine like you see them close together, I could put my thumb between them. And that was when the skin would split and gangrene would set in. Well, this woman had the dropsy over her body and was now unconscious. So she started it off, put the fomentations on, and gave her a half a cup every half hour, and was able to stay with her for a day or a little over. Then she had to fly back because she had to be to work Monday. Well, she said, the reason I'm out of wind and in such a hurry tonight, she said, I flew in and I had my job. I went today back to work. And she said, when I left work, when I got home, the phone was ringing. And when I answered the phone, the voice said, hey, this is your brother-in-law. He said, would you like to speak to someone? And she said, yes. And then a voice came over and said, hello, and called her by the first name. This is your sister. She said, I understand you were here to see me over the weekend. I don't remember you being here. I was in a coma. I don't remember. But they told me you were and that you left this herbal medicine for me. And she said, you know, I was up this morning helping the children get ready for school, fixing their lunches. And she said, this is the first time in 6 months that I've been up and around. And she said, my edema is all gone. And she said, I'm alive. They didn't expect me to live more than a few days, and I would have been dead by now. And this woman said that that was worth all of the studying she'd ever done in trying to help other people, to see her own sister saved. This is so simple, just parsley root. There are so many wonderful things that we have got, if we'll just use them. And there'll be so many things that they'll be needed for. It'll pay to know about them. Juniper berry. Now this is an herb. It has 3 stones, 5 stones, 7 stones. The juniper berry is one that has saved many lives, because where an individual cannot void their urine, this makes it possible. There are many stories on this, but I remember a young lady from South America had been en route to the BYU University for 3 days, where she was going to study there. And she had not voided her urine in 3 days. Now, if any of you have tried to hold on for a half hour or an hour, you can imagine at the end of 3 days, she was screaming. The pain was more than an average person could ever stand. They had tried everything recommended to void her urine, but nothing seemed to work. They called, and I told them to have hot water ready. And when I got down there, this girl was lying on the floor, screaming at the top of her lungs with pain. I took the boiling water and just put a teaspoonful of juniper berries in it, stirred up the cup full, and when it was cool enough, we propped the girl up, and she couldn't speak English. She took a swallow, and in a second or two smiled. Took another swallow, and got up and headed for the bathroom and voided her urine. Will they work fast? Ha! Boy, just give them a chance. The right herb at the right time, it does a beautiful job. This was one of the door openers for the people in that family. They became herbalists. The young lady, I guess, is still studying herbs, but it saved her life. Juniper berries. We give it in formulas generally, but not too many people know about it. That's why I say it's rarely given alone. But it's there to use, and those juniper berries should be in everybody's home. There are some of these herbs that we're lost without them. They should be there for us to use in emergencies. Nobody knows when that emergency will come. Lobelia is an herb that we'll never know all the answers to, because there's always a new one coming up. Lobelia is one that I haven't completely fathomed, as many herbs are. But I remember I was down in Arizona, and I had finished a lecture series and had everything packed, and we were heading for the airport. And someone there cut their hand open with a piece of paper. You know, a paper cut can be very, very nasty and very painful. The cayenne was packed. Everything was packed. And I was flabbergasted. I didn't know where to turn. And one of the men looked up on the shelf, and there was a part of a bottle of tincture of lobelia. It had been used for something, and it was sitting there. And he said, would lobelia work? And I said, I never heard of such a thing. But let's try it. We took the tincture of lobelia, and poured over the wound and stopped bleeding right now. Right now, it stopped. And I was flabbergasted. I'd never heard of such a thing. Well, this is how I get some of my lessons. I'm just stupid enough that I have to be taught the crazy way. Well, here is one of them. But lobelia is so perfect. It's so wonderful. You know, a child can get bit by a mad dog. You can see that they get 15 drops of tincture lobelia every 15 minutes. A little bit more if they can take it without nausea. And there'll be no infection. There'll be no problems. We have seen so many things happen like this. We have seen people who want to get to an area and they have to be vaccinated. And they don't want a vaccination. So we start them off with tincture of lobelia. And they take it regularly. And they're forced into taking the vaccination, but nothing happens. If you use too much lobelia, it will be an emetic, and it'll cause you to throw up. I just remember my wife told me to always tell this story about lobelia because she thought it was quite interesting. She had watched the procedure. I'd come off of a series of lectures. I guess it had been 20, 25 days lecturing continually, and I got home just as a break. But I was rather exhausted. I was down in our family room sitting there. Our youngest son, Steve, said, "Dad, you look like you've been beat. Can I get you something?" And I said, "Oh, some vinegar and apple cider vinegar and honey always gives me a build-up. Why don't you fix some for me?" "Okay, Dad, I will." So he heads upstairs, and he knows that I use a tablespoon of honey and a tablespoon of vinegar and mix it up in distilled water. And so he brought it down, and he said, he had a great big tall glass. He said, "I know you're not stingy with your formula, so I gave you 4 tablespoons of lobelia and 4 of apple cider vinegar and 4 tablespoons of honey," and stirred it up. I said, "Well, fine, that's good of you." And I took a taste of it, and I says, "Yeah, where did you get that vinegar?" Well, he says right up there, he says it's apple cider vinegar on it. I says, "Okay," and I put her down. I sat there for a moment or two, and I knew that I had to change quarters, and I tried to figure how many steps to the sanitary unit downstairs, and then I knew I couldn't make it. And I stood up and I let go, and I kept letting go. And I'm glad it was a tiled floor. And my wife stood over in the corner laughing and laughing, and finally, after it all run down and I got the mop and did some mopping up, she said, I said, "I was over there dying and you were laughing at me." And she said, "Well, who could help but laugh because you were so weak and worn out, and then anybody that's got the strength that can throw it clear across the room." She said, "That lobelia is great stuff." She says, "I've heard that a few drops might kill a person, but you can tell people that you had 4 tablespoons. The reason we found it out, I checked out the bottle, and I did something that I wouldn't have allowed any place else. I had just found out that my tincture of lobelia, that was lobelia and lobelia seed, which makes it much stronger by far than just the lobelia alone. It was 14 days when I'd flown in, and it was just time to strain off. And there was nothing handy there but an apple cider vinegar bottle. It was empty. So I filled it in the apple cider vinegar bottle. Now, anybody that would have done a stunt like that without putting a different label on, or without scratching it, or something, I would have either fired them or spanked them. Well, I did it. And so I had put the tincture of lobelia and lobelia seed in the bottle, and it was the apple cider vinegar bottle. And my boy thought it was apple cider vinegar, so he gave me 4 running over tablespoons of it. Lobelia is one of the most innocent herbs we have. It is the most powerful herb, and it's as innocent as water. And when used properly, there is no excuse for a person not using it. I will say this, that use an additional amount, it acts as an emetic and you will throw up. And if you throw up, it's because you needed to in the first place. And get rid of it. But this whole thing goes back to Dr. Thompson of the Thompsonian routine, the Electra doctor. Dr. Thompson, as a small boy, about 4 or 5 years of age, was out, and he was an herbalist then, one of those Aquarians that was ahead of the time. And he would take certain herbs and he would taste them. And if they tasted okay, just taste a little, fine. If it didn't, he'd spit it out. And he was really wise. Well, he was the one that brought lobelia to America. And he, as a little chap, he gave it to one of his friends, a middle-aged man. And he said, hey, try this herb. And the fellow chomped it down and threw up. And well, this tickled Thompson. But there's a whole history on this wherein Thompson was arrested and thrown in a horrible jail because the man that had him arrested said that he had murdered a man by giving him lobelia, and could prove that he had murdered at least 50 more. This was ridiculous, of course. But to save him from dying from pneumonia in an open cell that had no windows and he had no coverings over his mat, they had a special trial for him. The doctor who had Thompson arrested could not give circumstantial evidence A or anything else. No exhibits. He just said, well, I know that it was done. But he did bring a man into court. He said, well, here, at least here's a man that used some of the lobelia. Thompson gave it to him. So the judge said, what did it do to you? He said, it made me deathly sick. The judge said, that's all. And the man said, no, it isn't all. It made me deathly sick and I threw up, and he said, I've never had any trouble since. Thompson was exonerated. And if you want to look in the Americana Pharmacopoeia, you will find under the word lobelia, deadly poison. A man was tried for murder using this. It's right in there. I've got it in my library. This has carried all these years, and people still believe that it's a vicious thing to use, which is a half-truth, malfunction of the truth, really. So that's my story on lobelia. Right while we're here, I'm going to tell you how to clear asthma in one operation. It's not too often I break into this, but there are enough serious people here now that I think this is the time. In Evanston, Wyoming, I'd opened up as a naturopathic physician, and nothing but MDs had been known there, and they didn't even know what a chiropractor was, so they didn't know what I was. And we nearly starved for a while, but then a doctor had given me quite a rough time, and it got worse and worse until 2 boys came in one night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I just got in off of house calls, and I thought someone was beating the side of the house in. I went down, and here these 2 young fellows had an old wheezing man between them, and he was just trying to get another breath of air. You know, it's an odd thing, folks, but breathing is one of the most important things we do, and yet we breathe automatically, in and out and in and out. But we don't do any deep breathing very often. And we don't even worry about breathing until we're about to die. And then we would give $1 million for one more breath if we could live just another minute longer. Well, this old gentleman was just about to the tail end. Now, may I say this, for asthma, for any type of disease, where I have had such great success over my years of practice, it has been because I've always taken that case on an emergency. When they figured a crisis had hit and they were either going to die or live. And this was when my success has been. This man, the boys told me when they woke me up and got me out, I told them to bring him in. And he was having a hard time just keeping alive. And the history was that he had had asthma for 26 years. For 20 years, he had never lain in a bed. They had a chair built special for him so he could sit up, so he wouldn't choke to death. And once or twice a week over that 20 years, a doctor would come and either give him oxygen tank or injections or something, or a pill or a tablet to keep him alive. Well, the doctor that had been taking care of him was on vacation, and the backup doctor couldn't be located. And so when the boys came in, they said, it says, naturopathic physicians, do you treat humans? And I said, yes, we do. Okay, well, yeah, help our pap. And so that's how we got started. They didn't even know, they just came to me on a gamble. Well, the first thing I gave this man, in between gasps, was a cup of peppermint tea. And he took the peppermint tea gulp by gulp as he could. And after he'd had the peppermint tea for 10 minutes, I gave him his first teaspoonful of tincture of lobelia, a full teaspoonful. We talked, and I watched the clock, and in another 10 minutes, I gave him the second teaspoonful. I then gave him the third, 10 minutes later. And may I say, in the hundreds of cases that I've had, and some of the cases that have been so close to death that we've been called in before they called a father, this has never taken more than 3 teaspoonsful of tincture of lobelia in any of these cases. So we sat back and talked. He had spent so much money now, the family had, on keeping him alive, that they had drawn all their savings and everything else out. And they were broke. But they wanted to keep Pap alive. So after a few more minutes, he started to throw up. And we had pans and buckets around. And he threw up over a cup of pus. And I mean, it was from green to black, yellows. It was the nastiest looking stuff. But it had come right out of those lungs and bronchi. And he threw up for, let's see, from 2 until 5. 3 hours. Now, if any of you are sensitive around the lower cavity, and you know you start throwing up, you're going to get black and blue. You're going to be so painful there that it'll be like someone had beat you with a baseball bat. He had no soreness. Absolutely no soreness. And no marks or anything. And why? There's the key. We gave him the peppermint tea. And this is the stimulant of stimulants. This is the stimulant that offsets people's fear. We could have given him cayenne, and he possibly would have taken it down. But he took the peppermint tea and liked it. But he had thrown up. And so I said to the boys, okay, your dad is ready to take home. He's healed. Oh, they said, 26 years, he's healed. Should I come back tomorrow? I said, no, that's a do-it-yourself kid. He's done. Well, they looked at me like I was pixelated. And they took Pa home. But when they took him home, he said, all right, boys, take me to a bed. This was 5 o'clock in the morning. And they said, well, Pa, you'll choke to death. You sat in this chair for 20 years. Take me to a bed. I'm still boss here. Little weazened old guy. I'm still boss here. Okay, Pap. They took him to a bed. And he slept from 5 o'clock in the morning through that day and that night and the next day. 5 o'clock in the morning, he was still asleep and he slept through until afternoon, which is over 30 hours. He was oxygen starved, just famished. When he woke up, he did the first time he'd ever been able to do this in 26 years. He took a great big deep breath of air and he didn't choke up. And he said, I'm healed. I'm healed. He went out the next day and got a job as a gardener, the first job he'd had in over 20 years. And he worked steady. And I saw these boys nearly 20 years later in Salt Lake. One of them came up to me to let me know that from Evanston, they still remembered me. And Pap was still alive and still working as a gardener and had not lost one day's work, and he'd never had in 20 years another attack of asthma. Each of my cases, and I've had many of them. One was my own niece, Ann Cummings. Her dad called, middle of the night. 14 years she had suffered with asthma. And they never asked for any help. Never. And I don't run before I'm called. But Jack called and said, your favorite niece is going to die by morning. If you want to see her, you better come tonight. And I said, okay, Jack, we'll be there. And last thought, before I hung up, he said, by the way, Ray, will you bring some herbs? 14 years. Will you bring some herbs? I said, yes. Packed my bag, and the wife and I went up there. This was in the middle of the night. And we used this same program of the 3 teaspoons of lobelia.
It has to be at that point that they're ready to die before it'll work?
It has for me. Let's put it that way. Because when I've been called out, it's emergency in the middle of the night. And this is where I've had my success. Now, we have a formula for asthma, hay fever, and sinus that over a period of time will even take care of emphysema. But it's a long range. But when you want it right now, you wait for a climactic time. All right, so Anne, we sat there and watched her throw up and come through this. She had been for 14 years a weak child. She now has 2 beautiful children, and she's doing very fine and has never had any asthma attacks. We have used the 3 parts mullein and 1 part lobelia so many times. What it actually is a glandular formula. This is the key to the whole thing. It'll work on any glands in the human body. It cleans them out. It can be used on a thyroid condition, overactive or underactive. We have seen goiters that are stuck out from the chin down, the most ugly looking goiters you've ever seen. But we have seen with this fomentation, put on regularly, 6 nights a week, it has gone back down. Of course, we give the oral as well, the thyroid formulas. But we give the whole thing, and we have seen this go back down to norm, underactive or overactive. We have sitting in his room a young woman who I don't know whether she still remembers, but I think she does. I got called out of bed one night and went 30 or 40 miles up to the north part of the state to take care of her because she had mastitis. She was nursing a baby. The baby had drained one side, but the other side was swollen several times its size. Red streaks going up to the middle, and you know that isn't the nicest thing in the world. And the baby, of course, could not touch that other side. The baby was crying because it was hungry. She was crying because of the pain. We used the 3 parts mullein, 1 part lobelia as a fomentation over this. And within a very short time, the pain was gone. The next morning, she called up and said the baby was nursing at that side. Boy's 5-year-old brother had had a little accident. Well, he was out playing with a 2-wheel trailer. He and 4 or 5 of the neighbor kids. And it had a tongue and a knob on the end of it. They were jiggling it back and forth. It was propped up on a log. All of a sudden it slipped off the log. And it came down, and when it hit, the little guy was sitting cross-legged, and it hit his privates and crushed his testicles and split the scrotum open, and he bled like a stuck hog. And he screamed. The parents came and saw what was happening. They rushed him in. They called the family doctor. The first thing they thought of, he said, "Oh, that sounds horrible. Get him right in here and we'll castrate him." Oh. Well, you know, those parents, it didn't sound too good to them for some reason or other. And all of a sudden he said to his wife, "Let's try that herb doctor again." All right. So they called. All right, one of our astringents, mullein. I took 3 parts mullein, 1 part lobelia, which is our great glandular food. It's on the market today. 3 parts mullein, 1 part lobelia. It is terrific. They had the hot water ready there. And that was when I went up and saw this other little boy in his healing process. Well, we made the fomentation. We didn't have time to go to 3rd power or 7th power or anything else. We just made the fomentation and put over the split scrotum and the crushed testicles, and put a rubber pants over, and told him to syringe down in there and keep it wet with the same tea. Within a very short time, days, the healing started. The scrotum came back together, and the liquids collected again, and the crushed testicles came back to size and were healed. This is absolutely amazing when you stop to think the difference between a complete healing and castration. I've got to tell one story here. There are so many of them, but I've got to tell this one to show you how this mullein and lobelia does work. I got a call one morning from a registered nurse in Provo, Utah. I was living and practicing then in Orem, and she said, my boy, 10 years old, has just passed out. The pain is so bad. He's got a large swelling. A gland is swollen on the back of his neck, and it's getting quite big. And she said, the pain is so bad that he has just blacked out on me. And what can I do? Well, this particular nurse had been a student of ours for quite some time. In fact, she was in charge of one full floor at the Valley Hospital there in Provo. And I had known that she had called all of her nurses in that are under her instruction and put them behind the locked door of her office and made them raise their arm to the square and vow that if anything happened to her while she was in the hospital, that they'd get her in a cab and get her away from there. It sounds awful. But she knew just too well that she didn't want to stay in there. And I known this, and so, I was feeling a little facetious this morning, and I said, well, why don't you take the boy on up to the hospital? I said, they'll take care of it, and there won't be any cost to you. She said, oh, shut up. She said, that's enough of that. She said, you know how I feel. Tell me what to do. And I said, 3 parts mullein and 1 part lobelia. Fomentation. I said, as soon as he comes to, give him a little to drink. And I said, follow through and it'll take care of itself. Being a registered nurse, she said, what'll I do? Well, how'll it work? Will it come to the surface as an ulcer and break? Or will it go into the lymphatic system, into the liver and gallbladder, and out? I said, I don't know your boy. I don't know how strong a husky he is. If I was looking at him, I wouldn't even guess which way it'll go. But you don't have to worry about it because it has lobelia in it. And your lobelia is a thinking herb. And a thinking herb knows which way it's supposed to go. She says, oh, nuts. Well, I'll use it anyhow. She was panicky. Within 30 minutes, now the good Lord has been kind to us over the years and has given us cases like this, different types of cases. Within 30 minutes, I got a call from a lake area up in Washington, Moses Lake. And the lady said, Dr. Christopher, please, my 10-year-old boy, same age, 10-year-old boy, has just had a swelling on the back of his neck. The gland is swollen up. And I don't know what to do. He's just blacked out. All right, same case, identical. She said, what can I do, quick? So I gave her the same formula, 3 parts mullein and 1 part lobelia. And she said, fine. Which way what'll happen? Will it pop open or will it go through the system? And she wasn't technical. She didn't know, as the nurse did. She couldn't be too authoritative. I said, I can't tell you. Because I don't know how strong the boy is. Well, thank you. I'll use it. 3 days later, the lady in Provo, Utah, the nurse, called and said, Dr. Christopher, I'll never, never lose that formula you gave me. It's one of the greatest things I've ever had. Well, I kind of nosy. I said, well, what happened? Well, she said, you know, within 30 minutes, all the pain was gone. He came to, and she said, it went smaller and smaller, and that gland went down and drained completely into the lymph system and out through his bowels. He's all right. Oh, she says, I'm happy. Well, it so happened that my timing was such that in a couple of days, which would be Monday, I had to be in Seattle, Washington. I was lecturing a series there. And a caravan of 3 or 4 cars came across from Moses Lake on the east side of Washington to Seattle on the west side. And in this caravan was the little boy, 10 years old. They had brought him along. And now I'd seen the nurse's boy by now, and he was a husky little 2 falls out of 3. You know that type. Tough. And I could understand how the boys would be scared to get too close to him. Well, here they brought me this little boy in Seattle, Washington, and he was so delicate. He was the saddest looking little tyke you ever saw. Blow at him and he'd blow over. But he was feeling pretty good. He was getting around. And I said to the mother, well, what happened? Well, she said, the pain left, and in about half hour or so, there was no pain. But she said, you know, that gland got bigger and bigger till it got nearly the size of a baseball. And it split, broke open. And she said nearly a cup of pus ran out of it. And she said in the next 2 or 3 days, 2/3 of another cup was drained out of it. But look, he's all right. His life is saved. The Lobelia knew very well that one boy was strong enough that he could take a cup or more of that pus going through his lymph system and out into the liver, into the bowels, and dispersed without hurting him. Well, what would have happened to that weak little guy? It would have killed him. It would have killed him. He couldn't have taken it. And it had to come to the surface. Lobelia, oh, it is one of the most precious herbs. It is a blessing from God if there ever was one. We talked some about mullein. It also comes under the astringent herbs. But mullein can be used in many, many ways. And one of the ways that is excellent for mullein, if an individual has bleeding from the bowels, this is frightening. We've had patients who have had to be brought to after they've stood up from the stool and seen the bowl full of blood. They've fainted. They've had to be brought to before they can be brought to us. It scares people to death. Well, it's enough to, when you're bleeding from the bowel, you don't know how far up or how far down, unless you're technical and you know the darker red it is, the closer to the stomach area. But we had a case that the man had been bleeding for weeks, and it was getting so bad, they took him to the hospital, and they kept him there on blood transfusions for enough weeks that the family decided we can get the blood transfusions at home cheaper than we can here in an expensive hospital. They took him home. Or started to take him home, but someone told him down in the lobby if they wanted to clear the bleeding from the bowel, to drop into our office on First South in Salt Lake, and we'd give them a hand. So when they came in, he came in spraddle-legged and someone helping him on each side. He had a large towel in between his legs to keep the blood from running down into his shoes. How fast he was bleeding. And when he sat down, we put him down on cushions. He was in a very delicate condition. And as soon as I found out what was wrong, I called in on the intercom and told them to mix me up an ounce of mullein in a cup of, get this, whole milk. Yeah. And make mullein tea with whole milk. Over the intercom, the scream came out, milk? Yes. Well, this is something that I hadn't prescribed before that any of the staff had heard of. And I said, yes, get it across the street at one of the stores and get it up here quickly. And so I said to the gentleman, you need to go to for a BM. And he said, yeah, how'd you know? And I said, well, anybody who's losing as much blood as you do will have the desire to avoid it. And so we told him where to take him to the restroom down the hall. By the time he got back, they had the milk and mullein ready, and we had him drink a full pint of the mullein milk. And I gave him plenty of mullein and told him to take mullein milk after each voiding. Each time he would have a bowel movement, he was to take another cup of mullein milk. And as it would taper off, It was in the morning now, and by evening I said it should be pretty well tapered off. Then do at least 3 cups a day for 3 days, and then 1 cup a day for 3 days, and you'll be all right. The bleeding will have stopped and will have healed. He took the mullein tea, and we sent him on home. Now, he had bled now for weeks, but he came in a few days, and he said, "That is a terrific formula." He said, "Before night, there was no more bleeding." He said, "I continued on as you instructed." And now, he said, "I'm so well satisfied that I'm going to keep this formula. I won't be going to any hospital, I can guarantee." This man was healed, and we have had many, many since this time, healed the same way. What happens and why the milk, you may wonder. They make Elmer's glue out of milk. Yes, it is pretty sticky stuff. The milk goes in, and where if the mullein was there alone, it would wash off of the particular area because it goes directly to where the bleeding is. And it would be washed out quite easily, but with the milk, it forms its own casein base and glues itself on. And this is why the milk has to be given every time they have a bowel movement.